On today's show, the good vibes return a little bit as the San Diego Padres win another series against another pretty good team, making a comeback win after a very poor Dylan Cease start against the Braves. Yeah, they dropped the last game of the series, but it's okay. But of course, there's a lot to talk about, including the Padres struggling against lefties, some upcoming scheduled games, and of course, Xander Bogaerts suffering a pretty, looked like serious injury on the field in Game 1. So we got a lot to talk about. Let's get started.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, May 21st. As always, I am your host, with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You might be familiar with my baseball-related work over at Just Baseball, where I host a new podcast called Baseball vs. the World, which is about general baseball silliness. Today's episode is about our favorite baseball movie scenes, so go check that out if you want. Also, check me out on Twitter, like I said, at Javipeno, Javiiipeno. Send me all of your questions, comments, or whatever. You can also leave them in the YouTube, and you might make it on the daily Monday mailbag episode, which was yesterday's episode. And that was a lot of fun. And actually, some of the things we talked about in yesterday's episode are relevant to today's episode. So check that out. It's like a sequel, you know? That's what we do on here, ladies and gentlemen. But we got a lot to talk about. The Padres winning another series against a good team, which has been one of the things that the Padres have been better at this year, is beating some really good teams. And then, of course, you blow it against Colorado. So hopefully they can keep it going, getting back to 500 after winning one of the two games in yesterday's doubleheader, winning 3 out of 4 games against the Braves. And it was an awesome fashion. But before we talk about that, guys, I just want to remind you, go check out PrizePicks, because they're sponsoring today's episode, and they're fantastic. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. First things first, as you all know, we love talking pitching on here. That's what we do. And Dylan Cease has easily his worst start of the season. And there's a couple things with this that we got to talk about. First of all, 4 innings, gives up 5 earned runs on 9 hits, walks 3, strikes out 5, raising his ERA from 2.45 to 3.05 on the season. His whip is still below 1. And just not a great start from our guy. It's just classic that this Braves team, which I talked with Jake Mastriani on Friday about, that they've had a lot of offensive players that have underperformed, which is why I'm not really upset about this. It is unfortunate that, of course, some of the hitters in the Braves lineup that have been struggling this year get to cease in this game. Like, of course, it's against us that they figure it out. With Michael Harris, has been underperforming. He gets an RBI in this one. Matt Olson has a big home run in this game and a single in the bottom of the first inning to drive in a run. Ronald Acuna gets an RBI single. All 3 of those guys have been really struggling this year. The only one that made sense, I guess, was Marcell Ozuna. He homers in the bottom of the third. Back-to-back home runs being given up in the bottom of the third by Cease here. Just not a great start for him. Not a great start. But I do appreciate that at least he was able to go 4 innings, just get a little bit more out there. And the bullpen for the Padres actually carries them the rest of the way. But just another thing on Cease, I will say, most hits allowed this season. His previous high was 6 for just hits given up in a single game, and that was against Philly. And that Philly start was really one of the things I talked about on the show, is that it's kind of impressive that Philly start, when you gave up 5 earned runs across 6 innings, that was like his worst start by far. I thought that said a lot against one of the best teams in the National League so far this year. And also his shortest outing of the season since the first game, his Padres debut against the Giants. So again, we could honestly chalk this up to just he was due. Frankly, and especially against a team, like I just mentioned, that has so many players, from Matt Olson, Michael Harris, Ronald Acuna Jr., the literal reigning MVP. So everybody wants to complain about Padres players. Hey, the Braves have had their own fair share when it comes to weird offensive players that are underperforming. So they do well in this game, and the Padres are down. And shouts to @TooMuchMortons on Twitter. If anyone on Padres Twitter follows him, he likes tweeting out the Men in Black meme whenever things are going bad. And the Padres make a comeback in this one after not being able to touch Reynaldo Lopez, who has been a really electric starter for that team basically all year. Their pitching has been great. Not being able to touch him, they do get him for 2 earned runs. And it starts in the top of the 5th inning, in which Jackson Merrill has a sacrifice ground out, who, by the way, Merrill low-key, I think we've talked about this a little bit. Hasn't been that great with runners in scoring position this year. One of the lower people on the team. The reason we don't care is because he's a 21-year-old rookie and his stats in a vacuum have been really solid and he's playing good defense. So we don't care. Yeah, we do not care. That old Mike Tomlin meme. I just do not care. And then he does follow it up, though, in the top of the 7th inning, getting a single. And then all the absolute madness breaks out in the top of the 8th inning with Jay Cronenworth getting an RBI and Manny friggin' Manuel Arturo Machado, man. He needed this so desperately. Double that not only gives the Padres back into the game, not only ties it, gives them the league 6-5. Manny needed that desperately. He'd been bad for a while. We talked about him basically all of last week. In this game, 2 for 4 with 2 doubles. 2 strikeouts, though, unfortunately. One of the things that we've talked about also is his increase in strikeout rate hasn't been great. Hopefully he's starting to keep it up a little bit more. Another thing on the first pitch, but he made really good contact, put it in the gap. Love to see it. And you love to see yet another comeback for this Padres team, especially when things weren't going well. With the Dylan Cease having his worst start, right? And you're thinking, oh no, we've got a doubleheader. You don't want to use up too much of the bullpen. And, they come through. We've said this a lot. I'm going to keep saying it. Yes, I understand that this Padres team is 500, but there have been so many tangible reasons that they've been better than last year. This comeback alone feels like we got one of them all of last year. And then not to mention comebacks against the Dodgers. Remember that Friday night game from a few weeks ago, I think it was? Merrill makes the catch to Rob Ohtani. Tatis hits the home run to put them ahead. The Cubs comeback obviously was insane too. There have been so many comebacks. They've hit better with runners in scoring position. They've been so much better this year. And I think that is important to keep in mind if you're someone who is more statistically oriented and you're thinking about it from maybe not necessarily what you see on the field, but just saying, hey, look, I'm looking at the numbers. I'm looking at how the team has played. I'm looking at our pitching. I'm looking at our bullpen. I'm looking at prospects. I'm looking at the depth. And I'm saying, look, this team should get better. Like it just should based on the logic of it. And especially based off of the bad luck last year. So that's really great to see for sure. But it wasn't just offense in this game. There's actually some great moments in this game defensively. As well as it's funny, like the Padres really have been the definition of it's so over and we're so back this year. Like Arise hits into a double play at one point in this game after Kim is like stealing the base on a full count. So Arise, literally, if he put the ball anywhere else in the infield except right up the middle of where the second baseman was, they wouldn't have turned 2. Of course, it doesn't end up mattering because the bullpen does its job and the defense does its job. Let's talk about the bullpen first. Logan Gillespie, solid debut for our guy here. Again, this is what I've been saying. And he's not a rookie, I understand that. But it's really cool that the Padres just seem to have more options than usual. I want to see more from Gillespie. I frankly don't know too much about him. But 2 innings, only 2 hits, no walks, no runs, 2 strikeouts. That was great, including one major one. Bases loaded against Matt Olson on a 3-2 count. Gets him on an inside fastball. Just excellent stuff. He was pumped, and he should be. That was awesome. And then Jeremiah Estrada comes in this game. Oh my gosh. 1 inning, 2 strikeouts, no hits, no walks, no runs, throwing some absolute filth on the corner. He had 1 pitch. I wish I had it in front of me. I unfortunately do not. But holy dear Lord Almighty, you guys got to go look this up. I think it was the strikeout on Olson that he had, if I'm not mistaken. Let me pull up the play-by-play really quickly. I believe it was the Matt Olson strikeout that was just, this guy's got the stuff. Right? Like he absolutely has the stuff when it comes to being a good reliever, someone who could be the 8th inning guy for this team going forward. And even frankly, if they don't have Robert Suarez, the closer going forward. That's why I praised the decision by Mike Schilt on Friday, or for Friday's game, I should say. And that I love that they put him in the 9th. Just really, really amazing stuff. That inside fastball he threw to Olson just is living in my mind rent free. So go check that out, guys. But in general, really good win for the Padres. Robert Suarez shuts the door as usual, and you love to see it. This bullpen is bouncing back. And that's one of the things that we talked about is that even if a Santos and Matsui struggle, I'm just not worried about it because you got Estrada. You can get, hopefully Kolek, maybe he can get a little bit better over time. You've got Alec Jacob in the minors. You got Kevin Kopps in the minors. You've got starting pitchers in the minors. There just seems to be a lot more depth on this team. And then you have guys like Estrada and Suarez who are just absolute, just throwing gas nonstop. So you really love to see that. for sure, against the heart of the order too. And don't get me wrong, the Braves didn't hit very well in this game. They left 12 men on base, but I'll take it. You know what I mean? And I'll especially take the fact that Robert Suarez maybe due. Eventually, he's got to give up some runs, right? Like, eventually that has to happen. But on the year, 0.44 ERA. I mean, he's like Edwin Diaz from a couple years ago, but gets helped out by the defense. Not only does Kim make a Willie Mays basket catch in the top of the ninth or bottom of the ninth inning to rob, who was it? Let me just get to rob Michael Harris of a hit, but also Adam Duvall lines out and Jake Cronenworth makes a diving catch at first. So it's almost like maybe that was a little bit of like it was going to happen. This was going to be the time that Suarez maybe blows it. But the defense said, no. What do we say to the god of death? Whatever that lie is from Game of Thrones. Not today, making great defensive plays. So an overall team-encompassing win. I also saw people posting the video of Tatis right before the Machado at bat when he hits the double that puts them ahead, talking to him, saying, giving some advice and stuff. Again, some good all-around team baseball and another comeback win for this team that has been so much better at making comebacks compared to last year where they couldn't come back if they had 27 outs and all they had to do was get on base one time, right? Like, that's what it felt like watching that team last year, as I discussed, I believe on Thursday's episode. Last year's clutch rating for the Padres was the third worst of any team since 1996. And the other two teams made the playoffs. You know what I mean? The other two teams who weren't good in the clutch made the playoffs. So just to give you an idea of how underperforming the Padres were last year, they're not that this year. But of course, that's not all, ladies and gentlemen, that happened. We got to talk about the second game of the series. We'll talk about it really briefly. And then we got to talk about Xander Bogaerts' injury and what that means for the team going forward. Because, man, it's unfortunate. Let me tell you. Really unfortunate. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you about our friends over at... I want you guys to just take a guess right now. Who do you think I'm going to talk about? Well, if you guessed LinkedIn, then boom, you must be Nostradamus. Maybe you could see the future. I don't know. But ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to predicting the future, no one can really do it. You know what I mean? But when you're an employer and you're trying to reach out, you're trying to grow your company, you're trying to make sure that you know who to sell to, the buyers, the right people to go to, you got to go to LinkedIn Sales Navigator because they've been here for a while. It is a sales intelligent platform that helps professionals effectively prospect and engage high-value customers, drive higher revenue, and increase sales performance. That helps you target the right buyers, surface key signals, which accounts you want to prioritize, all that sort of stuff, and shows you hidden allies so you can find those buyers that are most likely to convert. Fueled by LinkedIn's 1 billion. 1 billion. I need you to think about that. That's a crazy install base, especially for people who are looking in this line of work. You're trying to sell the right people. Well, there's plenty of people to sell to because LinkedIn's 1 billion member platform is there for you. Sales Navigator gives you the most up-to-date first-party data, enabling you to unlock conversations with the people that matter. And right now, just because you're listening to this podcast, as I knock over Tatis, hopefully that's not an omen, you can check out LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial. That's 2 months. We're going to be at the All-Star game by the time you run out of this free trial, I think. Math? I think that'll be the All-Star game by then. At linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon to get a 60-day free trial of LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Let it help you sell like the superstar that you are today. Remember, linkedin.com/lockedon to get started. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, free and available on all platforms. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we got to talk about a little bit of sadness. Before we get into game two, Xander Bogaerts left the game with an injury. And I feel bad about this. Anyone who follows me on Twitter, I did tweet a graph of Xander Bogaerts' hard hit data and how basically it's been going up, steadily going up and down, going up and down. And then lately it's been a steady incline. And it's like, okay, we're starting to believe, he's been hitting the ball better. We talked about this. We talked about this weeks ago. Well, it feels like weeks ago. Last week when he had those 2 home runs that were the hardest hits that he'd had all season. The fact that he has a new bat with a new knob. And in this game, making a diving play at second base, which he deserves credit for. Of course, I think Bogaerts has been shaky at second base, but not bad. Especially considering that the Padres very foolishly didn't really tell him that they were moving him to second for a while. But I do want to give him a shout out because he's 4 outs above average. That's cool, right? Like if you want to use advanced stats to measure his defense, he's been actually really good there. And he makes a diving catch here and lands on his shoulder in a really rough way. The immediate reaction, of course, is wrist, right? That's what everyone's immediate reaction is. And it doesn't seem to have been that. Preliminary results came out negative, although we're still waiting to hear more. And I think that this is a bummer for a lot of reasons. And I know that some people are probably going to listen to this podcast and say, well, he'd been stinking all year. It's like, well, yeah, but first of all, let's feel for the guy for a second. You never want to see a player get hurt. And Bogaerts, at the very minimum, has just been available for this team. It sounds weird, but it's like he hasn't missed a game. Like, not really anyway. Like, in terms of injury, like, he really hasn't missed all that much time until this time. And it really stinks because of what I just mentioned. I had tweeted out he'd been hitting the ball harder lately. He has a good glove at second base, which I just illustrated. So that's a really big bummer. Hopefully he's not out for too long. I will say, though, in terms of a baseball team building perspective, that it really does help that the Padres have some batters off the bench that could fill in. On top of the fact that you've got, potentially, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later, and Eggy Rosario, if you never need to bring him up, if you ever need to move some things around, if you ever need a new DH, that's fine, right? Maybe that becomes a situation that they look into. Maybe they want to play some more righty-lefty splits, which we'll get into in a second. But the Luis Arraez move helps ameliorate this just a little bit, I think, for this Padres team. The fact that he can slot in at second base while Xander recovers, however long it is, hopefully it's not too bad. It was a little reminiscent of the Trevor Story injury. For those who aren't following all of baseball, Trevor Story, shortstop for the Red Sox, really injured a lot, came back this year, was hopefully going to make an impact for that team. Even as a Boston hater myself, it was rough to see. Makes a diving catch and is in pain on the ground. Just couldn't even move. Now, I don't think Bogaerts was as graphic and as awful as the Trevor Story injury, which has kept him out now for the rest of this season. But it had a similar vibe to it. And Bogaerts was down, and it was just so rough to see. And I hope that he, it's not too long, right? Like, I hope he's not out too long because, again, he was just starting to show some signs of life. And that's what really makes me upset, right? Like, he really was starting to show some signs of life. He'd been playing good defense, and I don't know. I'm not saying he was going to break out, but it really, really looked like he was going to be a little bit better. And we'll see if he has a chance to avoid the IL. He's got some strength and some range of motion, is what they were saying. So for now, they're calling it left shoulder inflammation. So we'll see. Personally, I think because of the Arraez acquisition, I think because you have Donovan Solano, if you want to slot him in at DH and just have that be the guy who's actually low-key been okay for the Padres so far. He's batting .462, actually, believe it or not, with the Padres, and that was mostly at the beginning. But even still, that guy just gets hits. A little bit of a mini Arraez in his own way. Or if you want to, if Xander Bogaerts was to land on the IL, maybe you call up Eggy Rosario, who has been really good against lefties his whole career, and maybe that helps you out with your lefty-righty problem as of late. So you could do that. I don't know, though. And frankly, if they do put him on the IL, maybe that's a good thing. Give him some time to recover. Give him just a little bit of off time, maybe, just in general, some time to rest, because that's been one of my questions for a long time, is I'm just wondering, like, is Xander Bogaerts just hurt? Has he been playing hurt for a while? Because last year, one of the reasons why we defended him, or at least I defended him, was that he got worse after getting that hit to the wrist from Spencer Strider with a fastball, like 96 miles an hour. And you saw the numbers decline. And then you saw, as the season went on, he was pretty good in the second half, 130 or so WRC plus. Like, he bounced back. So he literally showed you the hitting skills were there, aside from the runners in scoring position. And this year, it just hasn't been there at all until literally very recently. So again, I'm hoping he's not out for too long. I really do think that he was showing some signs of life. He even was getting some signs of life in the respect that there were some hits that he was being robbed of, right? Like he actually had been, which we talked about in yesterday's episode. So hopefully he's not out for too long. Thankfully, though, this isn't going to be a killer for the Padres. I'm just hoping that it's not a long-term injury. That will hurt more. But if it's just a brief IL stint, I do think this team is set up well to be able to make up for his absence, at least for now, and especially considering that he hasn't been playing well. So we'll see how that transpires. But, man, that Arraez trade really seems like it helps, especially a lot right now. So we'll just have to see. But, of course, there was a second game that happened yesterday, guys. And there's not much to talk about for it, really, frankly. Like, there really isn't all that much. But we still got to talk about it. This was the domination of Chris Sale, who, unfortunately, speaking of Red Sox players, this one apparently is going to stay good, though, unlike the one that we've had and unlike the one, unfortunately, that ended up going to the Dodgers. But he goes in this game, Chris Sale, 7 innings, no earned runs, 5 hits, no walks, 9 Ks. He's been really good all year for the Braves. He had a brief period with the Red Sox where it looked like he might have been cooked, but he's been amazing this year. He hasn't given up a run since his start against Seattle May 1st, and he only gave up 1 run against them. Previous start before that, only gave up 1 run against Cleveland. He's had a Yu Darvish, Dylan Cease kind of run lately, so I'm not super surprised. And frankly, it's okay, because to sweep the Braves would have been a lot, but winning 3 out of 4 was great. It doesn't surprise me at all. It does stink that after all of this, it's like, back to 500 again. You know what I mean? Like, we're back to 500 again, which is just, I don't know what to say. It's just funny to me, like, how this team, you keep looking up and you're like, wait, how are they only 500? That's like crazy. How are they a couple games under 500 now? Like, really weird stuff, but hopefully they can change it around. We'll talk about that game a little bit more in a second, and specifically about the Padres lefty-righty issues right now. But before we do that, folks, I want to talk to you about the sponsor that we mentioned at the very top of this podcast, guys, and that is the homies over at PrizePicks. And here's the thing, it is the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Oh, you don't believe me? You don't believe me? Well, they've got more than 3 million members. That's right, 3 million. So go check it out, guys. All you have to do is just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. So, for example, Joe Musgrove. He comes off the IL. He is making a start against the Reds tomorrow, and you know what? I am in. I would take under on walks and over on innings, I think is what I would do for Joe Musgrove. I think he's going to be good with no other reason than, hey, Yu Darvish was great after he came off the IL, right? Let's hope that the good vibes continue with starting pitchers for the Padres. But if you don't like that, don't worry about it. They've got all sorts of things, and you can pick on all sorts of stats. They've got injury insurance too, which is awesome. So, like, for example, today, great example. Or yesterday, for those listening to the podcast, when Xander Bogaerts, if you picked Xander Bogaerts yesterday, over under on, let's say you picked the over on hits, over on total bases, over on home runs, whatever you did, and he left after just 1 at bat. So guess what? That's not going to count as a loss for you. That's really good about PrizePicks. You're not getting screwed with bad injury luck or coaches' decisions at the last second or anything like that, right? Like, let's say you're going to be following the NBA playoffs and you're like, wait, why is, Anthony Edwards only playing 22 minutes? Don't worry. They got you covered, man. If any of that weird sports chicanery happens, PrizePicks has got you covered. They've also got these weekly kind of community plays. You could check out that tab in the app. They've got all sorts of deals that pop up every now and then, different promotions. It's kind of like, for all my video game heads out there, Steam, any Steam PC players out there, well, it's kind of like that. They've always got new deals for you to keep you guessing and keep you betting and keep getting you back in on the action. I don't know why I'm talking like a Clint Eastwood character right now, but don't worry. I'm going to land this plane. Guys, because you've been listening to this podcast, I want to give you a deal, though. Go check out the app. Download it today wherever, Google Play, App Store, whatever, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's right. Just use the app, download the app, and then use the code LOCKEDONMLB for first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the Locked On Padres podcast. I hope you guys are doing well, because this last game was not very good. As I said, Chris Sale just kills them. The Padres unable to get hits basically all game long, with the exception of a couple people, and that is Luis Arraez and Jurickson Profar, as usual. Luis Arraez, 2 hits in this game, as well as one of them being a double. Loops one over. He's such an amazing player to watch. Like, forget numbers for a second. Let's just talk about this. Like, Arraez is so fun. Just a guy who doesn't hit the ball that hard, but will put the ball in play almost no matter what you throw at him. And he has all these winky-dinky hits, and it always goes through. The guy just knows what he's doing. He's a hitter's hitter, right? And he's the type of guy that all the old heads are going to love, right? Personally, what I think holds him back is the fact that he's not the best base runner in the world, but more importantly, not a great defensive player. If he was a good defensive player, we'd be talking about him as one of the best second basemen in the league. Unfortunately, he isn't. Can he improve there? It's not impossible. Hey, so Juan Soto went to the Yankees and he's made some strides defensively last time I checked. So maybe it's possible, but hey, that's the one thing about Arise. But Jurickson Profar also 2 for 4 in this game. Unbelievable season for him continues. Jake Cronenworth goes 2 strikeouts. Machado gets 1 hit off of Sale. Not surprising at all. I was hoping that Machado might hit a home run in this game, just because he's so used to facing Chris Sale all his time when he was in the American League with the Orioles. He'd face this guy a lot, right? Like, he was used to him. Same thing with the White Sox when Sale was on the White Sox. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't quite go that way, unfortunately, for the Padres. And that's basically it. There's really not much else to say here. I will say Ha-Seong Kim, 1 for 4 in this one, and he does get a stolen base. Ha-Seong Kim running around the base paths lately. Love to see it. Hopefully he keeps that up. Tatis, 3 strikeouts, 0 for 4 in this game. He is now hitting 249 on the season. I'm sorry, 255 on the season, it looks like. 346 on base, 435 slash line, OPS of 781. Good numbers, not Tatis numbers. And I think that one of the things, by the way, heading into today's game in terms of the WRC plus leaders with runners in scoring position this year, Jurickson Profar was by far and away the best, 213. Luis Campuzano, 174. Jake Cronenworth, 172. Ha-Seong Kim. So wow, I want to shout out everybody who's been saying, well, Kim has regressed this year. He's been good at 2 things. He is a defensive wizard, which you talked about, that, amazing catch that he made Willie Mays style. He was pumped up, jumping up in the air. It was great. In the bottom of the 9th against the Braves in game 1. And also, he's been good in runners in scoring position. He's at least showing up in that regard. Then Fernando Tatis Jr. coming into today, 113 WRC plus with runners in scoring position. That's not good. Manny Machado, 80. Jackson Merrill, 72. And then Xander Bogaerts, 39. We're not going to be mean to Bogaerts anymore because he was hurt and we already talked about him. But look, this is why, and I know some people get on me because, Tatis, well, the hard hit rate, it's there. And I'm like, yeah, but it was all there last year too. And I think that it's fair enough to start talking about this and saying, don't get me wrong, all of his numbers suggest that he should get better, right? His expected weighted on base is 386, which is the top 6% of Major League Baseball, right? And his current weighted on base is 346. But it's been a while now, right? And that is a difference, a 40-point difference. But even still, I think it's worth talking about. He has really weird at-bats. And it's also weird that he's actually walking more. I still think he's going to get better. I just don't think that these numbers stay that way for long. And if we want to go based on previous history, right? Like Juan Soto struggled for the first month and he had numbers similar to this. Only difference being that he didn't whiff or strike out, right? Obviously, but Tatis, all the hard hit stuff is still there. So he should get better, but he does have these at-bats. It feels like sinkers, low and outside, that he swings at them and he can make contact sometimes. He's not striking out too much this year, but he's just not doing a lot of damage with them. He has a first pitch pop-up at one point in this game, which I hate to see those. It just feels like he's pressing. It just feels like it. I don't have enough numbers to back it up. I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive maybe into Tatis soon, but I think he'll be better. Don't get me wrong, but in fairness, we need a little bit more, man. And the 113 WRC plus with runners in scoring position is not going to cut it, right? It's not bad. It's not killing the team. Machado, Bogaerts have been killing the team a lot more, but still, you need a little bit more from Tatis. Hopefully he picks it up. But for me, the bigger thing about this Padres team this year, and this has been brought up, I actually talked about it yesterday on the show, and I think that I want to talk about it a little bit, tiny bit more before we close out, because yesterday's podcast, my guy, my Australian homie, I know you're probably listening, asked me about the righty-lefty split thing with the Padres. And one of the things I talked about was, I think that the lineup's fine. I think that they added more lefties. I think that they have Merrill. They have Cronenworth, and Cronenworth is back right this year, right? And then you have guys like Arise. You have guys like if you had to, Graham Pauley that you have there, right? And you have Eggy Rosario who kills lefties, right? That should be, in theory, on paper, this team has guys that can hit lefties, but so far this year they have not. And if you want to go by WRC plus, which is what I like to use, against lefties this year, the number one hitter for the Padres is Eggy Rosario. In 34 plate appearances, he has a 183 WRC plus. He's hilarious though, because he hasn't drawn a single walk. He's struck out 44% of the time, but he's got an OPS of 1,000 against lefties. So he's been good there. After that is Jurickson Profar, who can do no wrong with a 181. Then after that is Tatis with a 114, and that's it. in terms of above average players against lefties. And it's really weird considering there's a bunch of righties in this lineup. But again, that's part of why I'm not freaking out too much, because I just don't think that Kim is going to have an 88 against lefties. Machado, 77. Bogaerts, 71. Jackson Merrill, 60. Jake Cronenworth, 40. Luis Campusano, 36. Like, I just don't think with a bunch of right-handed batters especially that they're just going to get killed by lefties all year long, because historically speaking, these aren't players that struggle too much against lefties, right? This is just not, that's not what kind of team and players they have. They don't have guys that we think about it. We haven't really had a discussion about hitting lefties and righties with this Padres team. In fact, the big thing with this team was we just need to have some more lefty bats in the lineup when the teams can potentially game plan against them, because it's so righty dependent. So many consecutive batters that are righties. You want to have a little bit of differentiation in your lineup. But career-wise, like, Campusano has a 169 WRC plus against lefties. Tatis has a 160. Bogaerts 133. Machado 129. Ha-Seong Kim 126. Jake Cronenworth at least 100, right? Like, he's at least average against lefties. So I think it has to get better. It's hilarious that Profar has a 90 career WRC plus against lefties, and he's just, guys, I don't know what's going on with Profar. It's amazing. I have no many more words, but when it comes to those splits, I'm not freaking out yet, because overall, let's look at it this way. You're facing more righties more often, and the Padres offense has still been very good this year, right? Like, so let's look at it from that perspective. And I'm just not buying that they're going to be this heinous against lefties. I just don't see it. But I will be curious to see if with Xander Bogaerts on the IL, if they perhaps, or I'm sorry, if Xander Bogaerts goes on the IL, if perhaps they consider bringing up a Eggy Rosario, which I would be a fan of, because you could say, you know what, against righties, maybe we play Solano, and then against lefties, we play Eggy for the time being, right? And then Arise plays second base, because Solano is usually a third baseman, so he would be DH. That's what they could potentially do. Maybe that offsets it a little bit. Eggy has been killing lefties basically his whole career, and for him, I don't think it's like a luck thing. He's actually shown in the minors too that he wasn't always great against righties, so I think that's legitimate. But that's basically my thing. I'm not buying the numbers. I just don't think that a team of righty batters predominantly is going to just explode against lefties. I don't know. I just don't see it. I don't see it. I just don't think that this has been a thing for this team, frankly, before this year. I just, again, I don't see it. If we want to go by it, actually, I don't have the season stats right in front of me right now. Let me see if I can pull them up from last year in terms of what they hit against lefties. Yeah, like Tatis had a 152 WRC plus against lefties last year. Kim 148, Machado 145. Heck, Grisham had a 124 against them. Cronenworth was an 86, but he was also just not great last year. Again, I just don't see it. I don't see it. And don't get me wrong, there are going to be times when they struggle. Arise, for example, Cronenworth historically not as great against them, but not this extreme. So I'm not super worried about that. But again, we'll see. And the other thing is this. Chris Sale is a bad example. Chris Sale is like one of the greatest lefty like pitchers that we've seen of this decade. Like, this is a guy that will take advantage if you're struggling like big time against a lineup like this. So I'm not overreacting too much, and I'm hopeful. And I'm definitely very hopeful because the Padres are playing a not great team next, and that is the Cincinnati Reds, who are currently sitting at a record of 19-28. But again, that's been the Padres' issue all season. They just need a series win here. You don't need a sweep, nothing like that. But then they play the Yankees, and then they play the Marlins, and then they play the Royals. So in theory, this should get better. They're starting to face more teams that aren't, super contenders, right? Although the Royals are actually good this year, so maybe that's a bad example. But after that, it feels like the gauntlet gets a little bit easier, right? After that series against the Royals, you've got the Angels. The Diamondbacks are faltering right now. Then you get the A's. Then you get the Mets, who are kind of like not bad, but their hitting has been a little bit underwhelming at certain points, and their pitching is a little bit weird at some points too. I'm not totally buying it. Then you get Philly. Then you get Milwaukee, Nationals, Red Sox. Like, I don't know. I just think that things are going to be a little bit easier as time goes along. And as Al Scott on Twitter pointed out today, the Padres are now 14-9 against teams above 500 in 2024. They're 14-10 now, by the way, following their loss the last game of the series of the doubleheader. That ranks second in the National League to Philly, who's 4-2. So just throwing that out there, Philly's got a great record, and they haven't played a lot of teams above 500. I don't think that this isn't like football, where the strength of schedule really does matter, right? Where I'm like, No, sorry, football nerds. I don't care if the Patriots defense has good numbers. They've played the Jets and Giants like 3 times each to start the season. Like, I just don't care. But with baseball, I just don't think that the schedule thing has as much of an impact. You just got to win, as far as I'm concerned. So this Red Series is huge. You got to catch them while they're down a little bit. Watch out for Ellie De La Cruz. But other than that, has not been a crazy good team so far this season. And I believe that the Padres actually faced Andrew Abbott and did pretty well off of him the last time they faced him. So hopefully they can do that. And with Musgrove back, hopefully he has a great start. We'll absolutely be recapping that and pointing out anything that I see, because lately, remember, right before he went on the IL, the velo was ticking up a little bit. His curveball was working a lot better. Hopefully maybe the IL stint was like a good thing for him. Same way it was good for Darvish. Darvish hasn't given up a run since he got off the IL, so hopefully Musgrove can replicate that sort of vibe and success to a similar degree. But until then, folks, you can, of course, follow me on Twitter, again, at Javipeno, Javiipeno. Follow the Padres podcast on Twitter at LO_Padres. And, of course, send me all of your questions and comments. Love to answer them, especially on the Monday show. Until next time, stay safe. And, of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.